Hello there. My name is Larry Beck. I'm Pete Beck's dad, and he is making a documentary kind of timeline of my life so that when I'm gone, he will at least have, the history of what my life was like in my day. So this is episode 1 of the life of Larry James Beck. And today is July 26th, 2006. And I am in Chiang Mai, Thailand. So the first question is, what is the whole military story with dates, locations, and how old you were at the time? And basically, what were you thinking at that time? So to answer this one, I have to give some background on the time frame that this was in my life. So I took some notes on some of this stuff, so I'll be reading some things. So when I was in high school and I was going to turn 18 and graduate in 1967, there was a war raging in Vietnam, and they had started a draft. That meant that it wasn't a matter of joining the military or not joining. It was a matter of you're going in the military whether you want to or not. It's called the draft. And it started in 1964, and it was for all men born between 1944 and 1950. Bingo! I was born in 1949. So I was going to be in the draft. So in 1967, over 11,000 U.S. soldiers died in Vietnam. That was the second deadliest year in the war, with 1968 having over 16,000 dead. And that was the worst year in the war. And that is the year that I would have been there. So I'm a senior. I'm 18. I turned 18 in March of my senior year of 67. I'm in Vancouver, Washington. And we are in this war. So I don't know exactly what year it was when I was in high school that I really began to think about and understand that, when I graduate, I'm going to go down and they're going to put me in the U.S. Army as an infantry person, because they're the ones that are getting killed. And they're going to send me to Vietnam. But I think it was in my senior year. And I'm thinking, and we were all thinking that, what are we going to do? Because this war was extremely unpopular in America. Because by now, everybody had figured out it was a political greed the usual nonsense of war, that didn't make any sense at all, that we were even there. And some people had figured out the false flag of how it even started in the Bay of Tonkin. And so all this stuff was coming out. There were protest marches against the war, and it was also Summer of Love, and the hippie deal was, blasting off full time. And so it was a very explosive time of life. And so I'm turned 18, right in the middle of that. And so, it's something very important that I got to deal with here at that age. And I remember when I was a senior, there was a guy that we all knew that had graduated the year before us. And he'd been very popular in school, and everybody knew this guy. And, he'd graduated the year before, went straight to Vietnam. And it just so happened that a photographer in Vietnam was taking pictures of all the action and everything. And so there was a picture that came out in the front of Life magazine when I was a senior that we saw of him, this guy we knew from high school, and he was a white guy, and he was holding a black guy in his arms, in his lap, that was dying, or had just died. And, the white and black didn't make any difference, but, at that time, there was a lot of tension between whites and blacks, and there was rioting and cities and stuff like that going on also. And so when we saw the cover of Life magazine with him on there, and it just kind of brought it home a little bit more, I think, because up until then, you go home, your dad's watching the news every night with Walter Cronkite, and that's the way it was. And of course, Vietnam is the biggest stories, and they show the fighting, and they show bringing all the dead soldiers off in coffins at Dover Air Force Base and Fairchild, and all these different places. And so you see all this stuff every night on TV. But it's half a world away, and it's not your war. It's not yours. And that's the way it was, of course, for everybody. It's kind of a natural thing. You just put it in the back of your head, and it's not mine, I'm not there. And then when these guys got there, even when they got there, it was like, it still wasn't a reality until they got hooked up with their platoon or whatever, and they went out on a patrol, and they got into a live fire situation where bullets were flying. And then they woke up to the fact that, bro, this is real. Wow, this is real. They're shooting at me. They're trying to kill me. So, my thinking was like, it's still a long ways off, right? Well, I had a brother who was 7 years older than me, and he had joined the National Guard in Portland, right across the river from Vancouver. And so he told me one day, he said, look, you turn 18 in March, the year you graduate. So you got like 3 months before you graduate that they're gonna come after you to take you. So as soon as you turn 18, you can go join the Army National Guard in that same unit I'm in. And then, you know, you're not gonna have to go to the regular Army because you're already in the National Guard. So I didn't think much about it. I just went over after I turned 18 and joined that Army National Guard unit, the 162nd Engineers Division in Portland, Oregon. I joined in November 26, 1967. And when I graduated from high school and well, at 18, I went to selective service and they took our physicals and all that. And, you know, people there were stoned out of their minds on acid and everything because they were trying to, you know, fail the physical and all that. And we did, you know, we didn't take acid and do that, but, you know, we told them we were conscious objectors, that, you know, we went to church every Sunday and blah, blah, blah. And they just laughed at us and said, yeah, right, get over there, sit down, shut up. So after all the physical, that was all day deal, they said, you're good to go. All the guys on acid, you're good to go. Everybody was good to go. So when I graduated, then, because I joined the Army National Guard, I had to go to boot camp for the National Guard. Well, I went to boot camp with all the regular Army people. There wasn't a separate kind of deal. So I went to Army boot camp in October of '67. And the boot camp and the AIT, which is advanced infantry training, but I didn't go to advanced infantry training because I wasn't going to NOM. I did another kind of advanced training. So I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Never heard of it in my life, didn't know anything about it, nothing. And so I went in October of '67, so it was in the winter. And then I came home for Christmas, and then I went back to finish my advanced training. So I flew from Portland, Oregon to St. Louis, Missouri. And then from St. Louis, I flew on a DC-3, Ozark Airlines. Now a DC-3 was the old twin engine planes that they used a lot in World War II to take the paratroopers. A tremendous workhorse plane during the war, and there's still some flying today. But it was you know, it's an old plane, it's a slow plane, and I remember we were flying and I was looking down on a freeway or a highway of, you know, some sort, and the cars were going faster than we were. I think, you know, we were probably doing 70 or 75, something. But there were cars going faster than we were. So we landed at Fort Leonard Wood. They have an airport there. It's a huge place, huge base. And so then we got on a bus and we went out and drove into the fort. And as we were driving through, I noticed that all the trees, these were like oak trees, and they were all black, just blacker than black. But the limbs were still there, and I was wondering, how did these trees, you know, burn up or whatever? They're black, but the limbs didn't burn. Well, I was sitting in the front seat of this bus, right next to our DI, our drill instructor. And tall, skinny black guy just back from Vietnam. And and he was being real friendly, you know. So I asked him, you know, I said, how is it all these trees burned, but the buildings didn't burn? He said, no, he said, it wasn't a forest fire. He said, it's winter. He said, everything dies here in the winter. These trees are all dead. They'll come back in the spring, but he said they die in the winter because it's so stinking cold here. They call this place Little Korea, you know. When it gets down to like 50 below wind chill, you know, we have to take you inside of a building. Can't be outside training anymore. And there were days when it was 40 below, and we stayed outside. I mean, it was the coldest I've ever been in my life. And so we pulled into these barracks and all this stuff. And this guy that had been so nice on the trip over here, he jumped up from that seat, turned around, and turned into a raving maniac, screaming, hollering, shouting, "Get off this bus, you bunch of bastards, get off this bus, what are you doing? Get up, man, you're on vacation, get off this bus now." And he turned into a raving maniac, man. So we all come running out of that bus, scared to death, and you know, and we went through all the things and got our uniforms and haircuts and you know, all the stuff you do when you go start in boot camp. And it was crazy. It was completely off the tracks. And you know, you were just operating in fear for those first few weeks. You didn't know what was going on, you didn't know what they were gonna do, when they were gonna do it, you know. They taught us how to make our racks and, you know, tuck in the sheets just right with a 45 on the corners, and you know, and so we got all that done, and then the guy comes in and he just threw over almost everything that we'd done. And you know, you gotta do this right and you gotta do it now, and so we're back, man. You know, they just drove you crazy. But you know, after a while you figure out the game they're playing, kind of stuff, because you know, they're trying to take you from a civilian and take you completely out of that world and completely transform you into their world where everything they do is different. And that's the process of boot camp. They're taking you off the street, they're turning you into killing machine basically by the end of everything. And so, you know, you're going on long marches, and I don't really know what I was thinking in those days, because a lot of the time, just at boot camp, you didn't have time to think. You know, you were busy from before the sun came up to after the sun went down. And you know, you were so dead dog tired by the time you could actually get some sleep that's what you did. But you know, I was thinking that I was fortunate that at the end of this time, all these other guys here, except for a few of us who were NGs, National Guard, they're going to Vietnam. That's exactly where they're going when this is over. And so that kind of thinking was kind of in there somewhere. And when they found out we were National Guard, we were not so popular, because they were going to Nam and we were going home and just go to a meeting, you know, once a weekend, or a weekend once a month. And there were times when we were out doing the camping in the woods, and Hanoi Jane was on the loudspeakers telling us to come over because they had hot coffee and pizza. And, you know, they were role playing being in Vietnam. And I remember how fortunate I was that I was not going in that group. That was always in my mind, that whatever I had to go through, it was okay. It didn't matter. Because whenever this is done, I'm going home and they're going to Vietnam. And some of those people I was with, the only way they came home was in a box. Because that's what it was. That was the way it was. So I was that close to going to Vietnam. If it hadn't been for the National Guard, I'd have been shipped out. So after Christmas, when I went back to finish up my training, because we were an engineering outfit, I was going to be training on a piece of heavy equipment. And so the piece that I chose was a front end loader. And so for 8 weeks or whatever that training period was, I just loaded dump trucks with gravel that they spread around the icy, snowy roads in Fort Leonard Wood. And in the evenings, we'd go to the club and drink beer. And the next day, I'd go get on the front loader and load up dump trucks. And it's kind of fun, actually. I enjoyed operating the equipment. And so I did that for the rest of the time. And then I went back to my unit in Portland when I had completed boot camp and my advanced training. And we flew on the DC-3 back to St. Louis. And then we flew on a jet back to Portland. So now it's 1968, and I'm soon to be 19 years old. And I got back to my unit in Portland, and there was a huge surprise in store for me. Because when I checked into my unit, I noticed that all the heavy equipment was gone. No front end loaders, no road graders, no bulldozers. All the heavy equipment was gone. So when I got into the headquarters and stuff, they said, hey, we changed units. We are no longer a heavy equipment unit. We're no longer an engineering unit. We've been changed to an infantry unit. An infantry unit. What? Yeah, we changed to an infantry unit. And so they handed me a rifle and a pack and said, well, yeah, we're training for riot control over in southeast Portland, because there was riots going on in those days with the blacks and the whites and whoever, you know, there was just that kind of racial tension that was going on in the city. And so there were some big riots that happened, and they call out the National Guard. to come and try to stop the rioting. And so I was like, yeah, this is not going to work for me. And there was another friend of mine that was in the same unit as I was. We'd gone through boot camp and AIT together. And he said, man, I'm not going to do this. And so we just decided, early on, look, we are, we're not doing this. But what choice did we have? So we told the operations people, well, we didn't sign up for this. We signed up in an engineering unit, and that's what we are. That's what we train for. And they said, well, yours is not to question why. Yours is only to do or die. So I'm thinking, okay, well, then I'm gonna do. And I'm doing something different. So me and my friend, we just decided, well, we're not going to any weekend meetings. We're not gonna go to anything. And when they call us to come do riot control, we're not gonna show up. We're just not going. And so we didn't. We didn't go. We didn't go to anything. There was a 2-week summer camp. We didn't go. They called a number of times. My dad would say, oh, your unit in Portland called. You need to get over there right away. They're doing riot control, I just went with my friends to the drive-in and drank beer, So I didn't go, this other guy didn't go, and I kind of thought that at some point in time, something's going to happen, because this is the military, and they're not going to just let you disappear. But I didn't know what else to do, and I wasn't going to do that, so I didn't do anything. And through the years, I thought that it was about, I always thought that it was about a year that I didn't go to any meetings. But when I timed it out and really looked at the timeline of this stuff, it was more like 6 months. And so for 6 months, me and this other guy, we didn't go to anything, didn't do anything, didn't answer anything, didn't talk to anybody, just nothing. Well, one day, to my big surprise, I got a letter from the U.S. Army that said I had 30 days to report to Fort Lewis, Washington, to be inducted into the regular Army infantry, or the AWOL, absent without leave, and that if I didn't report, I would end up in prison. I'm 19, and I got this letter. And yeah, I kind of woke up, kind of had a little shock of fear run through me, and so it was like, wow, it's the real deal now. Okay, I'm gonna go to Fort Lewis. I'm going to be in the regular army, infantry, and go to Vietnam, or I'm going to end up in prison for however long that is. Well, I didn't want to go to prison. And I didn't want to go in the regular army infantry to Vietnam. Didn't want to do either one of those things. And a lot of people went to Canada in those days. They just drove across the border up north into Canada. And there was nothing the U.S. could do to get them out of there. So they just moved to Canada, started a new life. And there were some NGOs up there, non-governmental organizations that would help. They called them draft dodgers, that wanted to go to Canada because they were protesting the war, and they would help you get started with a new life in a new country. But it was cold in Canada, and I didn't like the cold. And so I just couldn't see myself living in a country that had a lot of cold weather. And so I didn't know what to do. I just didn't know. And I couldn't figure anything out. And the days were going by. And then, and then I was down to 14 days left out of the 30 days. 2 weeks left to do something. But I don't know what to do. 14 days left. My friend, the other guy, who also got the same letter, he called the house one day, my house where I was living with my parents. My dad answered the phone and he said, "Yeah, he's here." And I thought, oh man, you know, it's the National Guard unit or it's the Army, whatever. So I really didn't want to answer it, but you know, I was right there and I thought, oh. So I answered it. Well, it was my friend. And he said, "Larry, get your butt down here in Vancouver to the recruiting depot." There was a block there that had Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, had all the military offices there in this one location. He said, "Get your butt down here just as fast as you can." I said, "For what?" He said, "Get your butt down here as fast as you can now." I said, "Okay." So I went out and I think I had the motorcycle then. And anyway, I went down and he was at the Navy recruiter's office. And I walked in and he was sitting there in front of a recruiter's desk. And he said, "Listen to this guy. Listen to this recruiter." I said, "Okay, I'm all ears." And the recruiter said, "Well," he said, "your friend here told me about your issues and your problem here." And he said, "I'm here to tell you that you are prior service. You're in the military as National Guard. So you're in the service. So," he said, "you can you can change branches of the military if you want. I said, yeah. He said, yeah. He said, you can get out of the National Guard, you can join the Navy for 4 years, active duty, and I can have you on a plane in San Diego in 7 days and start Navy boot camp. Start your 4-year contract. I was like, so you're telling me that you can get us out of the National Guard, that we can join the Navy, and we can sign up for 4 years, and we can be in San Diego in 7 days, starting our 4-year contract in the Navy? And he said, yes. I said, where do I sign? I mean, this was like I died and gone to heaven. Where do I sign? Come on, man, get the paperwork. I'm in, I'm all in. And so he got all the paperwork done. We signed everything, took the oath, and he gave us the paperwork to give to the National Guard office. And all we had to do then was get ourselves ready to go to San Diego. So we got our paperwork. We're in the Navy. We are in the Navy, and we're gonna be gone San Diego with 7 days to spare. I was a happy camper. I couldn't even tell you. I thought, what in the world? How could this possibly be? And my friends, I asked my friend, I said, whatever possessed you to come down here and talk to this guy in the first place? And he said, I don't know. He said, I just didn't know what to do. So he said, I just thought, well, I'll go down here and talk to the Air Force, talk to, not talking to the Marines, but, I'll talk to the Air Force, I'll talk to the Navy, I'll talk to whatever, see what I can find out. And he said, the Navy guy's the first guy I talked to. And so when he told me this, I called you, told you to get down here. Wow. I was just so thrilled. So the next day, me and my friend, we took our envelope papers over to the National Guard unit. And this is the first time we had showed our faces there for 6 months. And it was just a weekday, just the full-timers were working there. It wasn't a weekend drill or anything. And so we went to our lockers, got all our gear, took it over to supply, put it up on the desk, and said, yeah, we need to check this stuff in. And the supply guy's like, what do you mean check it in? You can't check your uniform and all your equipment in. You're still here. I said, well, actually, we have been discharged, and so we're turning in our stuff here. and we have an envelope to give to the company commander. And he really wasn't going to take our stuff, but we just left it there. Walked over to the company commander's office and went in, and when he looked around in his paperwork, he said, "Oh," he said, "you two are the guys that haven't been here for a long time." "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." And yeah, we got a letter to report to Fort Lewis and go in the regular army. So we're not gonna, we're not joined up here anymore. And here's the envelope with all the paperwork that says we're honorably discharged from the National Guard. And he was pretty amazed that we were out of that unit. He couldn't hardly believe it, but there was nothing he could do. So we turned everything in. We're walking to our car, and one of the sergeants that was always a problem saw us, recognized us, and he said, "Where are you guys going?" I said, "We're going to San Diego." He said, "What are you talking about? You better be at the weekend drill." We said, "Bye-bye." And we got in the car and we left. I'm 19 years old now. August 23rd, 1968. We go to the Portland airport, we jump on a jet, and we fly to San Diego, California. They're waiting for us at the airport, of course, with some of the other recruits. We get on a bus and we go to the boot camp place in San Diego, California. I think it's called Camp Nimitz. It's on this little island thing. And the Marines also do their boot camp on the other side of the island. And so we show up for boot camp. And the boot camp, compared to the Army, was like a vacation at Club Med. I mean, we didn't do anything. We practiced marching. That was basically it. We just practiced marching for the big parade at the end of the boot camp, because it was kind of a big tourist attraction for some reason. So a lot of people came to see the recruits that they knew, their sons or whatever, graduate. But it was also like a tourist thing, so there were always big crowds that showed up to watch this parade. So we had to learn how to do all this fancy marching and all that kind of stuff. So we learned how to tie knots. We had fake ships there that we had to learn how to move around on. We learned how to fold our clothes so that they would all fit into that sea bag that we had. You had to get everything you had into that sea bag. And we did a little gas mask training and but it was firefighting and ship stuff. But it was nothing. I mean, it was nothing compared to the Army boot camp that I've been in. And since I had been in the other boot camp, the CO guy that was in charge of our squadron, he was going to retire right after this boot camp thing that he was doing with us, and he was the captain on a submarine, and he was retiring like 20-some years, so he didn't really care, much about anything, because he was getting out. And when he found out that I had been prior service and I knew how to march and do all that stuff, he said, "Hey, I'm gonna make you the squadron leader guy, because you know how to march and do all this stuff." And so in the back of the barracks, he had a nice big office with his bed and bathroom and all that. And then more front toward the rest of the barracks, there was a smaller, just a little bedroom kind of thing. And that's where I stayed. So, it was just a piece of cake. Nothing hard about it at all. So that was August 23rd, 1968. I was 19, and we went to boot camp in San Diego, California. I didn't think too much about the boot camp because I was just there, and I didn't know where I was going after boot camp. I didn't know if I was going out to a ship. I didn't know, I didn't know where I was going. Nobody knew where they were going to be stationed. But I had put in to be an Airedale, or to be in aviation somehow. That was what I requested, as to where I wanted to work in the Navy. And so I figured, well, you'll probably get sent to a carrier, and if you get that at all, which was no guarantee. So we went on leave after boot camp. I came back home, and I think it was like a 2-week leave. So I came back and, hung out with all my friends and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going back to San Diego, and we're all going to get our orders of where we're going next. And so I'm going to stop this edition right here, because I don't want to go like much over an hour at a time, just to make these in segments that are, easier to listen to. And so next time we'll start at the end of my boot camp in San Diego and where I got stationed, and what happened after that. So that's the first edition of this documentary, and I will see you on the next one.